really
absolutely. Okay, so maybe we should make a start. So welcome everyone to the which month is it? March seminar. We have Alex Cavgias. I thought it was Fraga, your first surname.
Yeah, can call me Alex, everybody.
Right. Alex is here to present the spoils of colonization. Alex was very helpful when I presented to give me kind of a lot of feedback on the paper I presented, and he's kind of emerging young scholar, and so we thought we'll get him on the GLO. So Alex, as you can probably see, this is being recorded, and we'll put it on the GLO website. And I hope you are okay with people interrupting to ask questions. And
No.
Okay, over to you then.
Okay, so today we will present a paper named "Spoils of Colonization: The Impact of British Colonization on Sexual Prejudice." So this is joint work with Cristian Navarro that should be online. He's a PhD student at the CEMFI, one of those very smart young PhDs. So you probably, if you are in economic history, you will listen this name for in the near future. I want to start this presentation by talking about one big issue, which is social tolerance. I want to mention a quotation from the British philosopher Bertrand Russell, which says, "The moral thinker should say." So he was asking in BBC about his advice for future generations, and he answered two things: one intellectual and one moral. There is the interview on the Google, is super brilliant. On the moral side, he was advising people to be socially tolerant. The moral thinker should say, I wish to say to them is very simple. I should say love is wise, hatred is foolish. In this world, which is getting more and more closely interconnected, we have to learn to tolerate each other. We have to learn to put up with the fact that some people say things we don't like. So, and this was in the 60s, 50s. Imagine nowadays. So that is an important topic here, which is social tolerance. We should be able to coexist with people that do and things that we may not like, not agree. And this is a big topic for social science. We want to understand why some people follow Mr. Russell's advice and some people don't follow. Why some people have high levels of prejudice against people with different life choices, and why other people don't have them or even like it, diversity, okay? So we want to understand this variation. Why some people are that way and other people are in the other way. And we particularly want to look at the historical factors that shape the distribution of social tolerance. We will be looking to one specific aspect of social tolerance, which is sexual prejudice. I'll be very direct on the research question we have here, which is how does British colonization impact sexual prejudice in post-colonial societies? So sexual prejudice is something defined by social psychologists as a negative attitude toward an individual based on her or his membership group defined by its members' sexual attraction, behaviors, and orientation. People with different sexual behaviors. It could be lesbians, gays. We are looking at a broad definition, particularly in the context we'll be studying is more related to male homosexuality, but now in the broad question, we are looking at on something broad. This is a relevant type of prejudice, and it seems to be affected by British colonization. The literature has lots of hypotheses regarding the relationship between the two things. Okay, I want to start here by putting the limitations of the research. British colonization is a broad treatment, okay? If you read this as an empirical research question, British colonization has many things varying at the same time, okay? In our case, I want to anticipate the main ones, which are the penal codes. The British systematically criminalized homosexuality in its colonies by imposing colonial penal codes, and we'll be talking in detail about this. But there is also a simultaneous treatment, which is they also enforce good institutions for economic growth. There is a long literature showing that where you have British colonization, you have better institutions and better development. So there are many things varying at the same time. So look at these things carefully. And also educational systems, the British relied more on missionary education than the other colonizers. So there is a broad treatment. There's like lots of work to do to understand what's happening. Okay, so just to mention, and we'll be talking precisely about this at the end of the talk. But that's the research question. The treatment is British colonization. The outcome is sexual prejudice. And now being less agnostic and putting the hypothesis that is being widely discussed outside economics, we are more like people that, economists are people that put data and causality on things. But the hypotheses are created from law scholars, from anthropology scholars. There's a very nice work by Alok Gupta that's very famous, that's named The Alien Legacy. And he was the first to study in detail these laws that imposed Bulgari laws, anti-homosexuality laws in colonies, in places where this didn't exist. And apparently those things persisted and changed beliefs in the future, okay? And then there is a companion work by Hannah and O'Mahony, which coded the laws at the country level and showing that countries with British colonial institutions have much stronger persistence of these laws, okay? And one of the most famous quotations about, about this is from Sanders, which is, of the great colonial powers of Western Europe, Britain, France, Germany, and Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain, only Britain left this legacy. So there is a perception that the British were the ones that left the spoils of colonization, the legacy of the anti-homosexuality laws. And we want to test if this affects sexual prejudice in the future. Okay, this is based on lots of work and very nice work from international relations, from anthropology, and we are here putting all the data and testing this with causality. And not all the paper, but most of the paper is based on Africa as a laboratory. And why Africa? There are many reasons, but the main reason is that the anthropological literature shows that before colonization, many ethnic groups that were coded by Ananieva and Porker, at least 56 ethnic groups have records of pre-colonial same-sex partners, meaning you saw same-sex relationships there, consensual, and they were not necessarily criminalized as they are in the future. So there is an apparent reversal of beliefs. You are bringing something alien, and you are waiting 200 years and to see what happened with people. So after colonization, there is something very salient in Africa, which is 80% of the World Value Survey respondents display some degree of sexual prejudice in Africa. So it's by far the continent with the higher degree of sexual prejudice. So those things, they suggest a reverse of beliefs. That's why we're looking a lot into Africa, because it looks like a very nice laboratory. On top of this, there are the borders, which were imposed exogenously, and you have split ethnicities with the same ethnicity, where you have the guys with the same pre-cultural background, one exposed to one colonial side and other. So we have like a very nice lab to test with causality and to see how the arrival of an alien penal code or an alien culture changed beliefs in the future. So this looks like a very promising laboratory. Any doubt, any question, guys? So can I continue? So you can feel free to interrupt. Interaction is good. So I want to continue by trying to make the case that this is a very relevant question. And I know there is like a disagreement among economists, between economists on this. At least on this audience should be more to the side of agreement. Sexual prejudice is a relevant phenomenon, economically speaking. If you are in an environment with lots of sexual prejudice, you decrease the welfare of sexual minorities, which are non-negligible, fraction of the population. Okay? So you may have worse, sexual minorities may have worse outcomes, educational and health outcomes. And there is also evidence showing that the degree of labor market discrimination against sexual minorities depend on the overall degree of sexual prejudice. So if you are in a place with lots of sexual prejudice, you may be harmed in the labor market if you are as a minority, if you belong to a minority. So this shows, okay, at least the targeted group suffers a lot. But on top of this, you also have the non-targeted group, which the sexual majority is being harmed, because you may change your choices just not to look as someone that belongs to a sexual minority. For instance, I think the classical example is like men not wanting to be hairdressers or designers, even having talent, because you may be confused with someone that's homosexual. So this may distort choices of everybody, okay? So this is a relevant phenomenon. This is affecting choices and is affecting mental health. And on top of this, there is less attention paid by economists. Okay, we are studying a lot about discrimination and prejudice toward gender and racial groups, minorities, immigrants, but much less to sexual minorities. Okay, so I hope you believe and you buy the idea that it's a very relevant question. And we know there is disagreement, but we are trying to make our case.
One quick question, Alex.
Yes.
So in your previous slide, you seem to be kind of
Yes.
implying that.
eventual.
Hang on, I have to mute this person. Okay, so basically here it's kind of you seem to be implying that before colonization, so colonization was a key factor in a way in Africa's kind of change of behavior, so to speak, towards this thing. But the way this book is kind of titled "Boy Wives" and stuff like that, was it more to do with kind of exploitation of young boys, kind of thing, sexual exploitation, which was then kind of the laws protected that, and we went away from the same-sex partners and stuff like that because it was more kind of unlawful activity rather than, and that colonization kind of made that particular aspect unlawful rather than the sexual.
That's a good point. I'm not saying what generated the 56 cases.
Okay.
For sure, there are cases where you have like imbalances on the gender composition of the population. This is usually associated with homosexual behavior. And for sure, there is war, mining. I'm just saying that somehow the phenomena existed in Africa, and the reaction of the overall population before colonization was not like it was before. I'm not making a strong statement. I just show that homosexuality doesn't seem un-African. Okay, and there seems to be some degree of tolerance in some environment that was different from the one that it's seen now. I'm just saying that things changed. I'm not making any claim that like they were super tolerant. There was like a third sex, like in Thailand, or this is too detailed. I know that in the books you have things related to gender imbalances in the population and so on, and both for men to men and women to woman marriage. So, but I'm just saying that those things existed and apparently were more tolerated in the past than in the future. Now you have like places like Uganda where this looks like the main political agenda of the country. This was not that a big issue at the past. It's more on this side that this was not so salient, this existed, this was relatively tolerated. There's nothing un-African here, and now we see something completely changing. Okay, people even considering make that penalty. So that's the overall reverse of beliefs I want to sell. Okay,
thank you.
Sorry if I was hand waving. I'm just citing that there's nothing un-African on it, and there is most likely the intolerance is the un-African thing, the thing that's important. So again, trying to make the case that this is a very relevant phenomenon, and this is understood by economists, and we hope that this opens room for a good contribution. And how can we measure the impact of British colonization on sexual pressures? We do 3 strategies. The last one is more, in the sense, causal. The first 2 are really to motivate things and to say that the phenomenon is not so constrained to Africa. We did a simple OLS in every single possible world value surveys that has the measure of prejudice, sexual prejudice in a former colony. And we do a simple conditioning analysis, both on fixed effects and income per capita, and the pattern is there. It seems to be global. Of course, this is not causal, okay? Especially because the main results come once you control for income per capita. But that's a good sign also that the effect is there, but there is a confounding effect, a simultaneous effect that is at the British colonial institutions, improving the welfare of the population and improving tolerance. So this whole chain of causation will be our mechanism analysis at the end, okay? That's the final goal. Well, I want to motivate that this is general, okay? And then we go to Africa, where we have very detailed information. We can do an OLS with many exogenous controls. We are taking everything that is or exogenous or dated before colonization. We're being very careful on selecting the controls, and once you see the pattern is there, the same pattern is there. We are conditioned on a large set of exogenous controls. And finally, which we consider the main result and the more reliable, if we restrict the analysis to ethnic locations in South and Southeast Africa, near the Portuguese British colonial border, you get a very solid GLO-RDD. We have a good population distribution in 6 countries, six former British colonies and 1 former Portuguese colony. And there are so many observations that we can even compare within ethnic group. We want to compare the guys in the same ethnic group to the Portuguese side with the guys in the same ethnic group in the British side. So this we consider a very reliable evidence, and it's very robust. You will see at the end. So that's our best evidence, but it's more local. So we want to sell a bit of both, something with high internal validity and restricted to the best possible experiment, and something more correlational but broad. Okay, that's the menu. And what we find, in every single methodology, there is a large effect. Okay, we call causal effect the last one. The first 2 we can interpret as correlational ones. In the first case, it's like there is an increase of 32% of the outcome average, okay, in our favorite specification. In the second case, once we restrict to Africa and put lots of controls and do the OLS, there is an increase of 25% of the outcome average. And finally, in the last exercise, the GLO-RDD, the effect is around 50% of the outcome average. And here we have more, like we believe we have a more clear treatment and a higher degree of having an effect that is related to the colonial laws, not to the imbalances of income per capita in development caused by colonization. And why? Why? Because the effect of the borders of the colonial origin is very small at the borders. This was shown by Michalopoulos and Papaioannou in Econometrica. So that's exactly invited to estimate the effect of the colonial institutions directly from the laws, not from the income per capita. So we'll be talking in detail, and the whole message seems consistent. There is a big effect of British colonization on sexual prejudice. And just to try to close the first part and then try to get some questions and see if everybody's on the same place. Okay, how this can be a contribution in which literature? We talk about we mainly talk with 2 strands. The first is legacies of colonial empires. We contrast this whole view that British colonization caused good outcomes in the future, because the start of the literature was based on economic outcomes, and it seems to be true that British colonial institutions are related to better economic and educational outcomes. But a recent stream of papers is trying to contest this view by documenting original legacies. There is a paper, an AR by Siwa and Anderson, documenting that there is higher HIV on the British side. There is papers by Merima Ali documenting undesirable effects. So we are kind of one more of these papers documenting an undesirable effect and novel effect of British colonial institutions. And the second strand of literature are the determinants of attitudes towards sexual minorities. We see 2 big groups of papers. The first studies the impact of historical events on future attitudes towards sexual minorities. And there seems to be things that matter, like the past imbalances in the population causes different distributions of sexual prejudice in the future. And the presence of Christian missions, it seems to be to foster sexual prejudice in the future. So there are very nice papers. Just a bit of self-promotion. Cristian and I have ongoing work trying to quantify the impact of the Atlantic slave trade, which caused a gender imbalance because they mainly exported men. So it was a country of women. Africa, especially the region sending slaves, were countries of women. So this generated sexual prejudice only among women Okay, so we are not yet a published paper, but there's lots of research showing that okay, the past matters, history matters, and there is a second strand of literature showing that legislation matters and changes in legislation matter. If you legalize same-sex marriage and same-sex acts, people become more tolerant, and that seems to improve also outcomes of the minority groups. We are kind of bridging the two, demonstrating that a colonizer who systematically criminalized homosexuality led to a persistent rise in sexual prejudice in post-colonial societies of a very large magnitude. Okay, we are showing that this specific historical factor that's more likely related to the legislation imposed by the colonizer matters a lot. This is kind of a first order determinant of the future. Okay, so that's our big messages. So we are happy to answer any question before I start digging on details. So I will come back to tables and show you how I got the numbers and so on. But I will be very happy to put everybody on the same page by now. So any doubt, any question?
Sure, I have one.
Yes,
From the examples that you gave us, are you sure it's country or is it religion? Is it Catholics versus Protestants and their colonial?
So this can be part of the treatment, because the Protestants, the British are mainly Protestant, and the Portugal and France are mainly, how let's say, mainly Catholic. But what I can say to you that at the end, we do like a falsification exercise where we control by the ethnic group, by the religious affiliation and the religiosity. So we are trying to see how much of the effect is explained by these two variables, and the coefficient is virtually unchanged. So this is not consistent with the main part of the treatment being the religion. Okay, so we have a falsification exercise at the end. We also suspected this, and it doesn't seem to be the case. But this can act in more nonlinear ways, so we cannot fully exclude. We're just saying that it's unlikely. Okay, but that's a very good comment. That this can be a part of the treatment. Additional questions?
Is there anybody who has done kind of, what was the reason for British to be more, and I mean, you know, sort of, was it conservative? They were more conservative than the others, or was there a strategy in terms of colonization was more effective? I mean, what was the underlying?
So one thing I can comfortably say, this is an open question, and I would love to have like historical, I'm looking for answers for this. One thing I can say for sure, because I see consistent work from anthropology and sexologists, that the moral in the UK was more restrained than in other places. So if you come from a conservative place, the governor of a colony should come from a conservative place. He should find certain practices in the colonies more disgusting or immoral, and he should be more willing to ban. Okay? What I cannot say is that the British had some sort of colonization strategy that made this act of criminalizing homosexuality more profitable. Okay, that I cannot find. It doesn't seem to be the case. The British had indirect rule and so on. The ones that were messing up more with the like religion, with conversion, were the Catholics, apparently. So this can also be contested. But somehow, what I can say is that, okay, this likely was important because it reflected the morality of the governors. There were very few open-minded liberal governors on the British side, so they were finding very natural to impose like moral codes from themselves to different populations. But that's kind of an open question. That's the best answer I have, and we'll get in touch on the difference on morality in the metropolis, and then how this somehow was imported to the colonies. We'll touch this in the next slides.
Okay, thanks.
That's a good question. Any extra doubt? I'll be very happy to have a small line of questions now. So now getting to detail, if I'm not interrupted by a new question, I will be digging on details, explaining the difference between the British versus non-British colonizers, and digging on the methodology. Okay, will be more detail now. So if you have any specific methodological question, you can as penal. So let's see. Let's look at the British side first. So in the metropolis, I could find lots of citations from good anthropologists, sexologists, saying that at the onset of African colonization, at the onset of the boom of colonization, the British ones, the British side was getting more and more conservative, while the rest of Europe was getting more and more liberal. I'm not saying that the average European was liberal, like he had an attitude like it is nowadays. There were two groups, one extremely conservative that was not criminalized, and one extremely conservative that was further criminalized, okay? Everybody was more or less conservative at the time. Maybe you can discuss if the elites of the French side were less conservative, but the average population more likely was very conservative at this time. And somehow the British governors enforced this in the colonies, and this is factual information. This is fantastic work by Hahn and O'Mahony, coding the penal codes, like they got the penal codes from every single former British colony and coded which punishment was done and until when it was valid. So it's very factual information. If you look here, you have like for Africa. Oh, sorry. So this is a wrong link. Let me try to give you one example of why this is actual factual information. We have the text of the codes on the books, and you see the most famous one is the famous 377 article of the Indian Penal Code. Whoever voluntarily has carnal intercourse against the order of nature with any man, woman, or animal shall be punished with penal servitude for life, like heavy punishment, or with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 10 years, and shall be liable to fine and to whipping. Okay? And there is no mentioning like attenuation for consensual same-sex acts. So it means that if you were caught in homosexual acts, you may be imprisoned for like in penal servitude for life or imprisonment for 10 years. And this is the first one and the most famous. There are other versions that are mentioned in the book, but they are changes of the main penal code, and this was systematically enforced in the colonies. India was a big colony, and somehow the other colonies were copying, like doing small changes in the penal codes. This was by convenience spread across most of the British colonies. And in Africa, only 2 colonies didn't adopt the harsher penal codes. They were Ghana, by chance adopted a different version that was written by a liberal guy, and I think Sudan that put the word consensual by a small change. So only 2 colonies in Africa, which is our main laboratory, didn't adopt the harsh penalties for consensual same-sex acts. So there's a clear variation on the treatment. So on the British side, they are being treated. And this is factual information. On the French side and the Portuguese side, it's a bit more difficult, especially on the French side, because it's very easy to say that something happened once you document the law. But to say that something don't happen is more complicated. So we are working on this. What we know is that France had legalized homosexual conduct in 1971 after the French Revolution, okay, at the end of the French Revolution, for some like arrival of legal rights. So sexuality became a right, and you cannot be punished by this if you do in private in consent. And lots of scholars cite and mention that this was important to the colonies, that the fact that consensual same acts were legal and accepted in the metropolis, this became naturally legal and accepted in the colonies. We look at the data in Africa, our main laboratory. 9 out of 19 former colonies criminalized same-sex acts. And remember, many of the French colonies is in the Sahel. They are Muslim majority countries. So it's somehow natural that they have this on the law. But only 2 of these colonies, they enacted legislation in the colonial time. So the data seems consistent with what the authors are mentioning, that homosexuality was not legal, criminalized in the French colonies. Then we see the Portuguese case, which is a bit of a middle case. It was exactly like the French. because the liberal institutions were imported from Napoleon to Portugal and then to the colonies. But then with the new state, with the fascism, it changed a bit. But somehow this was only extended to colonial territories in 1954, according to Gomes da Costa, Santos, and Waits, and somehow never enforced, because the law that was created was a metropolitan vagrancy law, and basically this applied to big cities. It was a law to persecute prostitution. And this, and the bigger cities in the colonies, especially in Africa, were pretty small. So he claims that this was never enforced in Africa. And if you look at the records, the attempts of finding records of condemns and process and how to say people being prosecuted and condemned by homosexuality, there's virtually nothing in Africa. And then, but in the British side, you can find cases. We are still in scarcity of citations, but the big picture shows some cases in the like, of course, law enforcement, some cases in the British side, and virtually no case in the Portuguese side. Okay, so everything is consistent with the big difference, like in one side criminalization, and the other side nothing. Okay, so those are the institutional contrasts we can find. We're still working on getting more information, but this is probably the most salient part of our treatment. And then, if I have no doubts on the background part, I'll move to describing the data and explaining where I got the simple numbers that I presented at the start of the presentation. We start with the correlational evidence motivating the generality of our phenomena using the merged data from the world value surveys. From the 303 nationally represented surveys in 107 countries, we select the ones that are in former European colonies, and we got 50 former European colonies from 7 waves from between 1981 and 2022. And we use an indicator that's equal to 1 if you mention you would not like having homosexuals as neighbors. This is not exactly the same variable, the Afrobarometer, that I will mention in the future, the next slide, but this is relatively comparable to the Afrobarometer. That's our main outcome. And around 50% of the global population, 45%, mentioned that would dislike having homosexuals. And in Africa, it's much higher. And then we run a simple regression analysis, this sexual prejudice against British, controlling by income per capita, wave fixed effects, and sub-region fixed effects. Sub-regions are like pieces of continents. Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Central America, North America. We are trying to make the countries less, like comparing with the neighbor or the closest country with a different institution. And we show that with and without doesn't matter. So here we show the results. So there's nothing once you don't have any, there is the expected sign, but not significance once you not have any control. But once you start including controls, especially income per capita or the sub-region fixed effects, you start to see like a positive and significant coefficient that has like that consumes a reasonable fraction of the outcome average. Okay, so here in the column 3 we are including wave and sub-region fixed effects. Once you compare yourself with the similar neighbors, you get something significant. And here, once you include only income per capita and wave fixed effects, you also have something similar, and doesn't change once you include both. So this is in line with the expected prior, that former British colonies have higher sexual prejudice. And this is also in line with the idea that British colonization caused increases in income per capita that somehow smooth the direct impact of the legislations. Okay, so that makes very important to find a setting where this direct effect, this effect from income per capita is more, it's smaller. If you want to understand what happened from the law, the impact from the laws, you have to find a setting where the impact in income per capita is like of a smaller magnitude. And that's, according to Michalopoulos and Papaioannou, exactly the case of Africa, for the ethnic groups far from the capitals, along the borders. Okay, so any doubt? So this is just correlational, but this motivates the generality of our phenomena and the necessity of using more sophisticated identification strategies. And then we move to Africa, which is the best laboratory because it has good data and natural experience. That's like bread and butter of empirical, of applied economists. We use Afrobarometer Wave 6, 36 nationally represented surveys. The size is 1.2 from 2.4 thousand, implemented between 15 and 16. And we have a similar question that asks, for each of the following types of people, please tell me whether you would like having people from this group. So it could be 5 options as neighbors. From you dislike, from you not care, to like, okay? So there are 5 lengths. You start with like, and then the last one is dislike, strong dislike. So meaning, we call them the negative categories. So we have this for people from different religions, from different ethnic groups, homosexuals, immigrants, and people with HIV. Our outcome is equal to 1 if you display any negative feeling. This is consistent with the definition from social psychology. If you display very bad or bad, doesn't matter. In this case, we check the robustness to the continuous scale, doesn't matter at all. This is for convenience. It's much easier to have indicator variables as outcomes. Okay, and this is the distribution. There is a bit of a hole in the middle of Africa in the Afrobarometer, but that's what it is. So there are 3 regions that are well covered: West Africa, East Africa, and South Africa. Okay, and here we also show the main 3 colonial oranges. We are dropping out American colonies, that's Liberia and Burundi, because we have limited knowledge of the background, but that doesn't matter. Okay, we end up with 27 countries that have our outcome, or one of the 3 colonial oranges we are considering. And here, there are 2 messages. Okay, let's put some descriptive of this data. There's one clear thing. Africans are not intolerant towards different religions. They are not tribalists. They're very tolerant overall, except with respect to one thing: homosexuals. It's pretty curious how the outcome average is different. Here you have 3.37, and they are pretty tolerant, quite tolerant towards the other groups. Okay, other groups. And there is one extra thing that suggests that we are measuring a different phenomena, that the variable prejudice towards sexual prejudice, it's unrelated to the others. The correlation is quite small. There is only a bit of correlation with HIV for a clear reason that people at least should associate the phenomena with homosexuality, probably in the wrong way in the African context, because that's not the case there in Africa. This was the case in possibly at the very start of HIV, but outside Africa, but it's not the case in Africa. So this is different. There is something different on this outcome. Okay, let's try to study what determines this outcome. What are the causal effects of British colonization on this outcome? And here we use a simple OLS regression, but full of controls, since Afrobarometer provides us precisely geocoded information. We have the tag, the latent launch from the village or the city where the respondent locates. We can put a large list of controls on this regression that should be cleaning for the confounding effects, because this variable is potentially endogenous at the country level. Like places with British colonies are different from places without. So there are many things varying, even things that are measured before colonization. So there's a lot of omitted variable bias of potential in this regression. And we want to, okay, let's try to clean this out with using clearly exogenous controls, things that are historical or are clearly not a choice of the individual, like the gender and the age. And those are our controls. I can show you in a quickly detail. Country level, if you are a former German colony, or if you are in a region, dummies for sex and age groups, lots of variables for the geography, okay, and important variables for the historical controls, especially distance to colonial railways and to Saharan trade routes. Saharan trade routes is the most important control because it's a strong predictor of the intensity of Muslim, the share of Muslim population, the contemporary share of Muslim population. So you are clearly showing that you have a macro phenomenon, lots of people being converted to a religion that condemns homosexuality. So that's a very important, that's a very important variable. Let me come back to the regression. And then we see, once we start adding the controls, so go back. Sorry, I get a little lost. So I think my links are a bit broken now. Sorry, a bit of the links are broken. So here, that's the table. Really sorry. So I updated the hour before the presentation, and they are not making the circle they should. So here are the results. We see that once we start adding controls, you will see a strong association between sexual prejudice and British colonial orange on the OLS. This suggests that there is a bias, and this bias goes against us. Okay, once you start including these exogenous controls, the relationship gets stronger. And the last column, you see the logic that uses the 1 to 5 variable, and we don't see a difference in the result. Okay, very important. We are in the control group here. We have both Portuguese and British colonies, and it doesn't matter. The magnitude is a bit stronger once we use only Portuguese colonies as the control, but there is also the correct signal once you compare only to French colonies. And there is a strong prior that this should be the case, because the location of the French colonies is concentrated in areas where there is a high share of Muslim population. That this, according to the books, it's a sin and it's a crime according to this culture. Okay, so we expect a higher sexual prejudice among these populations where the French are concentrated. So that's completely in line with the prior, and this shows that the association holds in Africa once we control for many exogenous variables. And this is the 80% comes from comparing this column here for the 20% here with 80%. So then we got the 25% of the average. And we move to the main evidence now, which is the GLO across countries. We are basically sampling a bit to the south, and we are taking the countries across the Mozambique border. There are 6 former British colonies and 1 Portuguese colony. And there are no deserts. There's a good population distribution. There are you have clusters in many countries, and you have so many clusters that you have clusters inside the same ethnicity in both sides of the border. This is a very nice region to do a GLO. And here you can see the distribution is very convenient for this type of analysis. And just trying to explain, we have here the ethnic group fixed effects. So if a village is inside the polygon of an ethnic group, here you have our treatment variable. Here the polynomial that depends on the location, could be on latitude and longitude, or linear on the distance to the border. And here we have all the controls we mentioned before. This is a simple specification, and we want to put the elephant on the room. That's a very important step on this paper. There is a convenient specification that works very well on this sample. So why we're using only Eastern and Southern African countries and not using Northern and Western ones? So first, the qualitative research shows a clear institutional contrast between the 2 sides of the border in this region. On top of this, there is limited Islam penetration in this region before colonization, and the presence of same-sex partners. So if there is one place where it's very likely that the British imported alien culture, is exactly this region. And on top of this, the coverage on North Africa is bad from the Afrobarometer, and the countries with British colonial orange on Western Africa, mainly Ghana, which was the Gold Coast colony, Ghana was an exception. It applied a very weak punishment for consensual same-sex acts. So the treatment is very weak on the main country in West Africa that has French, like French neighbors. So in the sense that we don't expect a priori a strong effect on Western Africa. And in some countries of Northern Western Africa, the effect could have a different sign, because the French arriving and not criminalizing may cause backslash. The treatment may have a different interpretation on Northern Africa and in some Western African countries. So that's really what I want to make the point, that the myth, the main experiment, what tells us about the narrative of the beginning of arriving with alien social norms, changing culture and behavior at the future, happens at Southern and Eastern Africa, not at the Northern and West Africa. Okay, so that's a very crucial point on the paper, and we think we have lots of arguments to show that we are doing the right choice on using this sample. And here is the graph, which is the main result of the paper. So if you compare the guys in villages in Mozambique with all the surrounding countries, you see a huge increase in sexual prejudice once you come to the British side of the border. And very importantly, even if you compare in column 6, the same ethnic group in both sides of the border, you have a very strong effect. And this effect is very robust across specification, doesn't matter the polynomial, the controls, this is there, okay? This is happening, and if you use a GRDD, you see it. And then we go to, okay, we probe this main result in many ways, and it's extremely robust. So we trust a lot this strong effect from the GRDD in Southern and Eastern Africa. But now there is a big gap on the paper. Okay, let's understand the mechanism behind these results. And then we can start thinking about lots of interesting hypotheses. And we starting doing what historians do. Like, first, let's discover what's plausible on the theory as a prior and does not explain the result. And we discovered that changes in general shifts in tolerance. Imagine, you are not becoming intolerant towards homosexual. It's not this phenomenon that's caused by British colonial institutions, but it's like you are becoming intolerant towards everything. It's simply a culture of intolerance. So we took an average of everything except our outcome variable, and we control it for it. That's our first falsification exercise. Okay, we coded a measure of what we call social prejudice. There are 5 items you may dislike, strongly dislike, or strongly like. And we coded everything that's not our measure. The first thing we do is checking the direct impact of British colonization on this variable. The second thing we do is controlling by this endogenous, by this outcome in the regression, the main regression of sexual prejudice, and comparing with the coefficient in our main result. So if we control by this average social prejudice, the results don't change anything. If anything, you have an increase. So it's not something general, it's not a general form of prejudice. It's something very specific to sexual prejudice that's happening in British Africa, okay? And then we go to the main hypothesis that changes in socioeconomic outcomes caused by the treatment are unlikely to explain our results. We test this hypothesis, okay? It could be religion, as was mentioned before. It could be economic outcomes, education. The British got less educated or more educated, but indoctrinated. It could be income per capita. It could be tons of things. Good news, the Afrobarometer has good outcomes at the individual level. And we go there and control by these variables. We include education categories, income categories, religion categories, exposure to the missions, exposure to different types of missions, Protestant versus Catholic. So we do lots of plausible interpretations, and we code on the regressions, and we add this line for additional controls, and we see that the results don't change. So this is very standard and common in cultural institutions papers. First, let's understand what does not explain. And that we think we have a good progress. Okay, so it's not a general shift in intolerance, and it's not socioeconomic outcomes caused by colonization. So this is very unlikely. I cannot say it's not, but it's very unlikely that these two stories explain our results. And then we go on digging in trying to learn what explains this large effect, and that's much more difficult. And that's what can raise the bar of our research. First, we do the easy part, which is going to the books and check historical accounts of enforcement of persistence and enforcement of sodomy laws. That's very clear. Okay, from Hannon and Mahoney, there is stronger persistence. Okay, there is much more contemporary criminalization of same-sex acts in former British colonies. It's there. We are replicating the results. This exists. What happens in historical accounts is that it seems to exist much more enforcement of these laws in the British side. Okay, especially if you compare to the Portuguese side, where the laws potentially existed for a while. Okay, especially at the end of colonization. There is many cases. Not the best cases are not in Africa, but in Asia and Oceania, there's clear and salient evidence of enforcement of these laws. So since the British were using these laws much more than the Portuguese, okay? The article from Gomes da Costa is basically to make the hypothesis that there was no enforcement in the colonies.
Sorry, Alex, about 4 minutes, okay?
Yeah, I'm at the very end. And I'm kind of in the last slide. So then finally we go to okay. We are starting to understand which type of colonial institution explain the result. We tried one exercise with Cameroon, which is a country that is split between France and French and British. And in this case, in this country, now the respondents of Afrobarometer, they are exposed to the same national institutions. And we don't find an effect in Cameroon, and this is strongly consistent with the idea that it is the persistence of national institutions, not subnational institutions, that's explaining the result. Here is the effect. It seems that once you level out the national institutions and everybody criminalize or decriminalize, beliefs become the same. So this is suggestive that the effect is explained by the persistence of national institutions. And here are the next steps. We need to improve the background part, which is clear from my presentation. I should get more factual information on the French side, a bit more on the Portuguese side, and put the best, like a tabulation of like at least some data at the country level for the sodomy laws, for the enforcement. We are getting there. I think the exercise of mechanisms that can really improve the paper is like putting a direct acyclic graph that quantifies how much of the relationship of British colonization and contemporary sexual prejudice is explained by the persistence and the existence of contemporary laws criminalizing same-sex relationships. So we would understand how much of the relationship between sexual prejudice and British colonization is explained by the legal persistence. And that can be really nice to make a better case for the hypothesis that it is the law that is explaining the effect. And finally, we would like to increase the external validity of the argument, making similar GLRDDs in other continents. The restriction here is data. We have promising like a preliminary evidence from Guyana and Suriname, but they are not detailed clusters. There's a bit of forest, okay? You need very detailed and expensive data to do a GLRDD there. There are other like national averages that have lots of contrast. Myanmar seems to have similar culture than Laos and Thailand, but has much more intolerance, and exactly was a case of British colony. Laos was French and Thailand was not colonized there. Like other cases that could be exploited to increase, like making a multi-continental evidence paper. You know, that's very hard and expensive. We get quotes of around 30,000 euros for two-country survey with geolocalized respondents. And we are trying to look for grants. Okay, so that's one of the issues of European work in European institutions. The budget, the free budget you have is very limited. So if you have any idea of a grant that could fund this, we'll be very happy to receive the link from the call. Okay, so we are looking for it. We know some of them, the Institute of Human Studies, some from psychology, but the value, we don't reach to 30K. Okay, we would love to raise the bar of the paper if we get the money. So that's everything I have to say. I guess I'm quite on the clock now. I will be very happy to receive questions if we have time. So if you want to make more questions after the end, I will be very happy to answer. So that's it. So that's the very end of my presentation.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Any questions? Yeah, Ira?
Yeah, more of just, I guess, a point. So there's a lot of work done on Africa on the colonial groups, let's say, who settled, who went there to work, etc. Now, I really haven't followed the literature that much, but they distinguish between the outcomes where areas were by different orders of the Catholic Church, Jesuits versus Franciscans. And I would just think that there'd be, it might be something else worth looking at, because it would seem to me that in terms of attitudes towards gender and sex may also differ among these groups, or maybe not. So at least link into that literature, I would think.
So link with the literature that relates to, like, you're saying specific factors of the missions should be the work of Valencia Caicedo, probably.
Well, yeah, there's a lot on land rights and property rights.
Mm-hmm.
And education systems.
Mm-hmm. More important.
So you could imagine, you could imagine priests going in and, teaching in schools about what the right attitude is, but maybe it's different among different subgroups of the same religion, different orders in their attitudes. I don't know.
Yes, we use it we group it, the religion variable, it's like big groups. We could add it broad, like in the sense with very small groups, but then it doesn't have power. I think what makes it's a good suggestion is to compare like exposure to the missions, because the missionary make more detail on the missions, the missionary order. Those are good suggestions. We'll try to like enlarge a bit the set of like make that table even larger. We have like 4 columns. We could make it like make more competing interpretations there. So this is a very good suggestion. Thank you.
Anything else? So did you, in terms of looking at the economic performance, is there any systematic difference between the British colonies versus other colonies?
So we didn't do with the pixels. We don't have with the pixels. I should check with Christian. But we use the individual level data, and I have to check. What I can tell you is that even if there is, once we control for it, nothing changes.
Right.
But we need it at the individual level, using the survey data because it's easier. What can happen, and we should do, is controlling by the average at the ethnic group level, because the intensity of light can be different, and then this predicts the economic activity. What I can tell you is that there is an econometrica by Michalopoulos showing that the differences, at least for whole Africa, not only Mozambique, are not significant because these regions are far away from the capitals. These distances these differences in economic activity seem to be significant for regions closer to the capital. So that's one of the reasons we like this African sample, is that the competing treatment, that is the effect of the common law on economic outcomes, is weaker here. So that's why we see a strong, it is very consistent with the signal. We see a stronger magnitude in the cleaner experiment. So, but I don't remember if we did for the pixels. I don't think so, but we did for individual level outcomes. And if I remember well, there's no significant, no effect. And even if there is, we are showing that by controlling for this, we don't change the result. So we should carefully check that's like appendix 33D. It will be there. We will check all the hypotheses. Check.
Okay, seems like there's nothing else, and then also I think we have just gone slightly over the time. So thank you so much for a very interesting presentation, very interesting paper as well, and good luck with everything, and great presentation.
Thank you.
We'll
release a working paper soon and then send to the series. So that's the intention. So, and we'll take some ups. Okay, there's lots of work to